right, here we go. Coming up on it. Good morning, everybody. I'm Mark Hegstrom with Business Owner Succession Strategies. We call it BOSS. We help business owners exit their business. Like a lot of you, we are a part of the process that's put forth by the Exit Planning Institute, the value acceleration model. I was just trying to get that to pull up on the screen here. There it is. I like to have that up there, especially this month. We have what's normally the summit, and the Exit Planning Institute has a summit each year. It was supposed to be in Desert Springs. Unfortunately, with the pandemic and the response to it, we haven't been able to do any of the trade shows and gatherings and conventions that we're accustomed to. So they are doing it virtually. It's September 14th and 15th, so that's next Monday and Tuesday. And if you have an interest in that, you can go to the website at exitplanninginstitute.org or type that in your search box and get to that. There are a lot of great speakers lined up. I thought it might be similar to some of the recent master class that they had, but I've come to discover that there are 12 speakers lined up, and it really looks like a great slate. So you can sign up for part of it or the whole thing. You can get a whole access pass. So that's good. We also have a great presentation coming up next time is in November, on November 12th. And on November 12th, we're going to be talking about divorce and exit planning and how those intersect. So put that on your calendar. We normally have the owners forum in March or in October, and we are not going to have that this time. It's been moved to November. So we actually have 2 things in November, but nothing in October. So the Owners Forum starts at 8 o'clock on November 10th. Watch for opportunities to register for that. Jessica will be sending that out, and our own Julie Keys is part of that committee. So I know that that's going to be a great thing. It'll be an opportunity for you to bring a business owner to that, or multiple business owners. I think with a virtual platform that we're going to have a lot more. So that's going to be kind of exciting. We've got a lot of great folks on the line today. Thank you for joining us. I want to point out some of our sponsors. We've got Bob Georges of Wilkerson Guffman. Thank you, Bob. We've got Brent Engelbrecht, one of our speakers from Sunbelt Midwest. Thank you, Brent. Susan Stiles of Stiles Financial Services is on our registrants today. We also have Terry Kravosha from Maslin Law Firm. Thank you for being here. One more sponsor in blue here is my own company, Business Owner Succession Strategies. We've got 3 speakers today from Ballard Spar, from Schechter Docken and Cantor, as well as Sunbelt, and I'll introduce them in a second. We've got some folks that have been on the call on the meetings for dozens of times. I've got numbers of meetings attended on this list. Todd Crow doing a great job leading the pack with most meetings attended. So thanks for continuing on that. We've got some folks that joined. Doug Cook is back. Thank you, Doug. It's nice talking to you the other day too. And we've got a first-time attendee, I think, is in Richard Jenke from Sunbelt, if I'm not mistaken. So welcome to you, and welcome to all of those who I did not mention. We've got a great steering committee. You've seen some of those names come up. thank you for your service on that. We are going to have a steering committee meeting in October, so we'll get that scheduled, and you'll see invitations come on that. So I'd like to introduce our speakers at this time, and then we're going to have them take over with the slide deck, and they'll just take that process over. So I'll just let that run for a second while we do this. Josh Bobich is an attorney with Ballard Spahr. He counsels closely held and family-owned businesses on mergers and acquisitions, corporate governance, succession planning, shareholder buyouts, and a variety of other traditional legal matters. He has an in-depth experience in the industries of technology, manufacturing, real estate, retail, and hospitality. Josh is a member of the board of directors and executive committee for the nonprofit First Tee of the Twin Cities, which seeks to improve the lives of young people by providing facilities and educational programs that promote character development and life-enhancing values through the game of golf. Thank you for your service on that, Josh. I've seen some commercials on there, and it really seems like a great organization. I hope you mentioned a little something about that.
Yeah.
Ryan Streetmatter is a CPA and a senior manager for forensic accounting and valuation services. He's got more than 20 years experience in audit, tax, accounting, and consulting. Ryan has experience serving clients in diverse industries, including manufacturing, distribution, construction, and various units of government. He is experienced in the analysis and complex accounting transactions, financial statement audits, internal audits, fraud investigations, and litigation support. All sounds very daunting and very exciting, and we're glad to have you part of the team, Ryan. Thank you. Brent Engelbrecht is our third speaker. You all know Brent. He's a multiple meeting man as well, and Brent has a key understanding of the business sales process, knowledge acquired firsthand as a principal in several successful businesses and commercial real estate transactions. Brent is now with Sunbelt Business Advisors and understands the motivations of buyers and sellers and exactly how to cut through the clutter and focus on what really matters, a successful transaction that feels right for both parties. He knows what it takes to properly present a business for sale. Brent is a certified business intermediary or intermediator, a CBI, and he has this formal designation has been bestowed upon him by the International Business Brokers Association. Brent is, among other things, also a SEPA. So he was particularly instrumental in selling a company a large case recently to a private equity group. We're excited to have you, Brent, Ryan, and Josh. And I'll just go ahead and put that off. And now you guys should have the control to put on the screen. And I'll let you take it away. Brent, I see you're muted. So if you're expected that or not.
Okay, I'm unmuted. So let me bring up this presentation.
All right.
Okay.
Now realize I need to acquire some acronyms behind my name. I'm like way behind these two guys. Jeez.
Okay, let's see here. All right. Well, thanks so much, Mark, and good morning. I'm the guy with the big head on the bottom left there, just so you know who I am. But just wanted to say welcome to part 2 of our 2-part series, Collaboration for Exit Planners. If you were part of part 1 last month, you got to hear from Michael Gregory. And Mike is a subject matter expert on the topic of collaboration and a professional speaker. He's a bit of a tough act to follow, but we're going to do the best we can this morning. Mike spoke to us, if you recall, from more of a big picture, universal approach to collaboration. We're going to take some of the key concepts we learned from him and apply them to our individual practice areas. When we first agreed to take on this assignment, we anticipated that this would be a live meeting. The idea at the time was to split into small groups, and each group would come back with their thoughts on how a particular matter might best be handled. In other words, we were going to use a collaborative approach to study the subject of collaboration. All that went out the window, of course, with COVID and the advent of Zoom meetings. Unfortunately, Zoom does not lend itself to large group meetings where the goal is interactive participation. That means that we now have to answer the questions that we're going to pose today ourselves. As a general rule, I think it's fair to say that the majority of business exits could be done much better than they are today, which is why we're here, right? We want to produce consistently better outcomes for our business owner clients. We recognize that better outcomes requires the introduction of practice areas other than our own. So in order to produce better outcomes for our clients, we need to collaborate with each other. So let's get started. How come I keep going to this page here? Okay. Oh, okay. I think we're good here. All right. You all received a case study about Gertrude and George. And rather than read the case study, just going to summarize some of the key points, because these are things that we're going to talk a little bit about this morning here. So number one, Gertrude and George have set some money aside for retirement, but by far the largest asset in their personal net worth is Gertrude's manufacturing company, which we all know is not uncommon. EPI research tells us that the average business owner typically has somewhere between 80 and 90% of their net worth tied up in their company. Gertrude's management style is very hands-on. She has no problem analyzing the payback on the purchase of an expensive piece of equipment, but she does not tend to look at anything that might be deemed to be an intangible asset the same way. You suggested to Gertrude that she's approaching one of the biggest events of her life, and it would make sense to assemble a multidisciplinary team of advisors to help her and her family make that transition successful. Gertrude professes to understand what you're saying, but she's used to doing things on her own and sees a lot of dollar signs when you're talking about forming a team. Gertrude's company, let's see here. I'm sorry, got to figure this thing out here. Gertrude's company does not have annual financial statements that are prepared by an outside accounting firm. Gertrude's company has a lawyer who seems to be technically qualified for the kinds of things that he gets called upon to do, but he's a sole practitioner for a reason. He has a prickly, self-centered personality. Gertrude's company has experimented with business advisors in the past, including the use of Traction EOS Facilitator, and those experiments, though, have generally not lasted long because Gertrude gets impatient. So we've got a lot to unpack here. And we pose this in a series of questions. And we'll start with question number one. Are there characteristics about transition planning that cause the initiative to be uniquely well suited to a collaborative, multidisciplinary approach? And you see our little cartoons on the right side there. So we're just kind of trying to kind of humor you guys as we go, and we've scattered them throughout the presentation. So Josh, do you want to start on this one?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. Good morning, everybody. Oh, no, I hear reverb. Does everybody else hear that? Are we good? Okay. No, that seems to be all right. Make sure you're not hearing me 3 different times. That would be horrible for all of us. So first off, for everybody who's attending, any time that you have questions or anything, please post those in the chat, and we'd be happy to kind of address those as we go to kind of make it as, I guess, interactive as we possibly can, despite the obvious limitations of being on a Zoom call and situation. But so first and foremost, I think if we go back, maybe we go back a slide, Brent.
Sure.
I think it might be the second one there. So as far as forming a team and the importance of it, I mean, as we look at our case studies, like kind of obviously well-tailored, perfect example of why, collaboration or a multidisciplinary group of professionals is ideal, is you always have business owners who are kind of stuck in their own, long-term business development plan, whatever that might be, or just somewhat stuck in their perpetual motion of keeping the thing moving forward and keeping it growing. And especially someone like an entrepreneur who is exceptionally hands-on, that's a tough cycle to break. You're used to being in control. You've been successful thus far. So how do you convince that business owner to take on other potential advisors, have other voices in the room to help with this transition planning process? So I think, well, I've done just fine up to this point. Why would I need the help of anybody else? Some of the points where that becomes, where it becomes critical to make the case of why you need, further expertise and help when you're getting ready for the transition phase has to do with, first of all, the complexity of the issues that you're dealing with. And in the case study, we're talking about not having annual reviewed financial statements or financial statements prepared by an outside accounting firm. When you get to the point of selling your business and moving into the next phase and finding a third-party buyer, all of those potential issues that maybe were lying under the surface, never really created an issue, all of a sudden come to a front. And you need people to kind of help you walk through that process. And it can take some time. And if you don't do that early enough in the process, and you wait until you're really at, the point where you have a buyer, you risk leaving a whole lot of money on the table. And I think those who are in attendance here know that from a business advisor and strategist standpoint. I mean, it's the more you plan for it, the better already have, good results moving forward. Not with the complex issues, you have highly specialized knowledge from people in a lot of different disciplines, but you don't necessarily need them all at the same time. And neither one of us, and I have no interest in trying to profess to be an expert in tax or to be an expert in accounting. And I know Ryan doesn't have any desire to be involved in anything particularly legal if he doesn't need to be. So, we all need one another to kind of, play our roles, but if it's planned far enough in advance, and you get to know one another and figure out what your roles are, then you only need those advisors, at certain points in the process, and you don't need to be paying them all at every step of the way for 10 years, 5 years, whatever period of time it is that you get prepared. This is the next point. No one of us provides all of those services or can fit in all of those roles. Let's go then. Flick to the next slide. These are all kind of, I guess, variations on the same point, is that specialists can speak when it's their opportunity to impart knowledge and also to listen to what other advisors have to say, and utilizing that collaboration and that general knowledge base to keep the costs in alignment as you're going through this process, and not having to be paying a consultant on top of an attorney, on top of an accountant, on top of an investment banker. They all fit into the process at different points, but they're all going to be more effective and more efficient if they have some level of connection and are dealing with the same set of facts. And that's what leads to, ongoing efficiency and a knowledge base that can be accessed by each of those, collaborative team members when it's time for them to step in and to speak up.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and jump in. I think it's difficult we're all here for the same reason, right? It's difficult to deliver the financial performance that's going to live up to your expectations without the collaboration. I've got over 20 years of experience, and I started off the M&A career in performing due diligence engagements. And as my career has advanced, I've become an expert in litigation consulting, and a portion of my work relates to post-close disputes. And the deals that come across my desk, I look and I say to myself, well, clearly no one was talking to each other. There's no way that the business owner, the attorney, the accountant, and HR could have all gotten together and said, yes, this was a good idea. So I usually ask the business owners after the fact, who were your advisors? And usually there's one or two, maybe, and I understand the qualifications of them and realize that this deal was broken from the start. I oftentimes tell people that I don't necessarily know how to structure the best deal, but I certainly know what a bad deal looks like. So I know how to structure those, unfortunately. I also think of it from an integration standpoint. If you're going through a merger and two companies are going to be consolidated, you would certainly hope that you would get the groups together for collaboration, be it finance, HR, IT, legal, as opposed to having one or two people trying to initiate all of that themselves. That would be the best way to oversee the integration. And we talked about the significant net worth that's held in the business. And if there's ever a time to invest in the experts to assist you, this would be the time not to skimp.
Mm-hmm. Ryan, when you see, and in the disputes that you've seen, what is the most common lack of advising that seems to lead to the biggest problems? Is there any one in particular? Is it legal? Is it accounting? Is it, other QAV analysis? Like what are the things that really make it fall apart on the back end?
So when I get involved, I'm a bit biased because usually when we get involved, it's because there's an accounting issue. So most of the stuff that comes across our desk relates to accounting. And it's the ambiguity in the terms with generally accepted accounting principles, consistency, and the terms will be defined differently throughout the agreement. So it's pretty obvious that the accountant and the attorney were not collaborating to determine, sometimes it'll say the financial statements were prepared in GAAP, and other times they will say they were not prepared in GAAP, but were consistently prepared throughout all the relevant periods. Mm-hmm. And just a little bit more on that, in the world of post-close disputes, the gap versus consistency discrepancy is the most hotly contested issue that comes across our desk.
I think I would echo that. With businesses we worked at for a long period of time, and maybe as attorneys and maybe business attorneys and advisors, we don't look as deeply into the books and that sort of thing. When we get to really get prepared for transition, it's you always have your own internal processes that it's just you have a controller or a bookkeeper that kind of does most of that work, but it really isn't done at a level of detail that's needed when somebody from the outside who brings in maybe a big top 5 consulting or accounting firm to look at what's happening, all of a sudden the picture becomes much different. I mean, you've done everything. Yeah, you've done fine for where you've gone, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're prepared for what's ahead and for what a buyer is going to be looking at. So I'd say definitely that's one of the top 2 or 3 things that always come up in the sale process, and those that I've been involved with.
Yeah, and the other area I can touch on is just the delay of certain procedures. You'll see it written into the agreement that certain due diligence items will be performed after close, or when you can't meet eye to eye on a purchase price and you incorporate an earnout. Those are ripe for dispute as well. Right. So anyway, I can go on and on, but maybe we should.
Well, quickly before I move on to the next question, I just included a chart here that's from Heidi Gardner's book, which is called Smart Collaboration: How Professionals in Their Firms Succeed by Breaking Down Silos. And this book provides a whole lot of a variety of different data that's been collected, I think primarily from within law firms and interdisciplinary collaboration within law firms, but applies much more broadly beyond that. But this is, I think, a pretty a representation in a graph format that I think most of us as advisors would understand is that, yes, we I think generally as a group believe that collaboration is incredibly helpful, but why are we so reluctant to implement it? And I think it's just kind of a good representation of that. It's because the cost on the front end of getting people on board is significant, not only to the client, but also to the advisors as well, of getting that, getting that level of comfort and that level of familiarity to be able to actually move along this benefits curve and get more into the excessive benefits. But it takes some upfront cost, planning, resources in order to get there. And I think that's just a pretty plain representation of why it is that we don't do it more than we do. There certainly is a benefit. There's a ton of data that supports it, not only from the perspective of Mike Gregory's presentation, but also in books like this that actually have hard and fast data about what advantages there are to be out there. But it does require a certain amount of upfront investment to get to the point where you're really reaping the benefits, both as a collaborative team and also for the benefit of the client.
Josh, I just love this graph, and I think it's a great way to illustrate to a client just the cost benefits and kind of what it's going to take. And it allows you to manage expectations when you're dealing with clients.
Yeah. And I think from an advisor standpoint, it's, in order to actually solve the problem, you got to know what the problem is, right? So, I mean, this
Exactly.
is kind of, so you can't, sometimes it's hard to articulate, okay, I know that collaboration is good, but why don't I do it? Because it takes some, we all have more to do than we have time to do. And then it's like, oh, let's add another thing of, planning for collaborative relationships on top of all the 900 other things we need to do. But we need to do it because I think ultimately it makes our lives a lot easier, makes the value to the client much better. I think just generally is a net business generator for everyone. You'll be working more in your lane with better information with more clients, as opposed to, trying to struggle along in areas where you really have no interest in playing in that particular sandbox.
Okay. Should we move on?
Yep.
All right. Question number 2. What types of team members might be included on a transition team? Professionals, family, friends, or mentors? I think you're going to handle that one, Ryan, or start out.
I will. I was almost that guy who didn't unmute his speaker. So anyway, yeah, well, luckily it's not the way that cartoon lays out, where you have to draft and you pick who's available. You're fully in charge of all the experts you want. You can spend as much or as little and pick the best or the worst. So here's just some examples. I'm certainly not going to go through all of the different types of advisors, but I did want to point out a few. If you look at number 2 and 3, tax advisor and an accountant, while I'm a CPA, and I did have to pass the tax part of the CPA exam, I am by no means the best tax guy in the world. As a matter of fact, when we perform diligence engagements on our end, we collaborate with the tax department. So it makes sense to, with my experience on due diligence and litigation and post-close items, I can also work with some financial reporting experts on certain technical issues in our audit group. But also we outsource the tax due diligence to the tax department. So oftentimes when I'm getting ready to do a due diligence engagement and I find out, I ask the business owner who your advisors are, and well, I have one and he's really good. He's my financial advisor. He's my tax accountant. He's, et cetera, et cetera. And you say, well, one guy cannot do all of this. I can tell you that it's much better to engage experts who know a lot about one individual topic, as opposed to one person or 2 people who may know a little bit about everything. And then same with business valuation. Our group, we do business valuations as well. But if you're hiring one person who can do it all, you're probably not going to get a great product at the end. And then clearly there's family members, mentors, and coaches. I even ask people if they have a therapist involved who can assist, someone to talk to, just because although it may not be the most collaborative event, it can be with mentors and coaches and family members, because this is such a shock to the system for so many people. Again, the studies have shown through EPI and elsewhere that the business owner's business really provides a great sense of purpose in their life. And if someone is truly exiting the business, it can be a very traumatic situation. So studies have also shown that people who seek therapy and get therapy, just have someone to talk to, generally are happier and healthier in their lifestyle. So this is by no means an all-inclusive list, but I wanted to present this to everyone. And if anyone else has any specific comments on any of these, go right ahead.
What I would say is, as far as the question, what type of team members might be included on a transition team, I think that's a discussion that starts, for instance, in the case study with you and Gertrude and George. And I think different engagements require different skill sets. And depending on how much time is available, that may determine, which practice areas you're going to press into service. So there's clearly overlap in certain areas on this list, but also no one area is going to cover everything. I think that's just a absolute fact that we've all come to grips with.
I'll just add quickly, in a lot of these categories too, when you're determining accountants, attorneys, advisors, is having someone that has some level of a bench within their, either if it's a small office or their firm or organization. You throughout the process, I mean, clients always need those really random, specific, highly detailed analyses of random things that don't come up all the time, but they do come up. And having access to someone who is familiar with those and can assess them quickly and provide advice on them is critical, as opposed to having someone who's much more of a generalist, maybe needs to actually learn about the topic, as opposed to having access to others, within their organization who can quickly answer those questions. So I think like organizations like Ryan's, who have different people who serve different functions in firms like the one that I work in, that have people whose specific job is being a specialist in tax, and in the accounting sphere, things like international tax, right? I think not every accountant deals with international tax issues. And recently in a couple of different sales, there's just a lot of just North American tax issues. I mean, the differences between the US and Canada are just huge and vast, and you need someone who like actually has that specific expertise. But you might only need them for, 1% of the transaction, right? Or 1% of the advising, just to provide some direction on how to structure things. So having that level of a bench and access is super important when planning who's on the team.
And at the end of the day, the point is, or at least one of the major points should be, you're trying to de-risk the business. And that's going to be what makes a potential acquirer or potential successor. It's what's going to make the business desirable. And there's many, many different risks beyond just accounting and legal as well. You've got IT. Is there a disaster recovery plan in place? With your family, do you have family issues? Is there a member of the family who's on the management team who has a drug problem, for example? Everything you're trying to do is to de-risk the business. Buyers don't like risk. And the more that you can demonstrate that you've taken these issues head on, the higher the likelihood that you're going to generate transferable value. I equate it to selling a house. If you just sell it by owner, you may think that you're saving money, but in reality, you probably won't recoup as much than if you get a realtor involved, you hire your own inspector, you make all the recommended changes, you update your kitchens and bathrooms. Suddenly, any prospective buyers going through the home are going to say, wow, this looks really good, as opposed to the question of, boy, this doesn't look good. What else could be wrong?
Right. That's a great analogy. We had a question on the chat here from Peter Moyer. By the way, hi, Peter. Thanks for joining us. How do you handle collaborators who claim that their approach and tools make them an ideal, quote unquote, quarterback to lead the process? Brent or Ryan, have any comments on that one?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?
Sure. It's just asked, how do you handle collaborators who claim that their approach to the process makes them the ideal quarterback to lead the transition process, transition planning process?
Well, again, I think it comes down to, nobody can do all this stuff. If we take the case of the prickly lawyer from the case study and we ask him to cover all these various practice areas, he may think he can, but it's clearly not in the client's best interest, and we know that. So I think a quarterback is absolutely critical in this process. Different practice areas can play the role of the quarterback, but somebody's got to keep the process going, and somebody's got to be responsible, and somebody's got to be able to tell the client, where they're at now, where they expect to go, and how do they win.
Yeah, I'll just real quick. I've had quarterbacks who have done it well and quarterbacks who have not done it well. The quarterbacks who do it well, it's more of a spider web where, they may be quarterbacking the process, but everyone has access to other people. And then I've had other instances where the quarterback says, I'll handle this. I'll have all the conversations with the accountant. I'll have all the conversations with the attorney, et cetera. And there's really no talking horizontally, and that's not a good way to go.
I'd say probably anybody who steps right into the process and immediately says, I'm the one to lead this, isn't always probably
He's
the
not
first
the one to
person.
lead it.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
certainly client driven. I mean, who knows, again, this goes back to the list of people. I mean, is there, I think you're probably going to need somebody who's, if you're at transaction status, I think you're probably going to end up in the attorney category for actually driving, how you get the actual deal structured, completed, closed. But earlier than that, I mean, I think one that really gets overlooked in the transition planning process is the wealth planner and the financial advisor for the individual owner. Like, what are the individual owner's goals and plans for this transition? What ultimately do they want? Do they want, I mean, they're just trying to, is there a certain price that they are, it's set in intent on achieving, having some sort of number to that and having some sort of, some of that in the early part of the planning process, I think is critical. Otherwise it's like, we're going to continue to chase every last maximum dollar that we can get out of this business, which really isn't necessarily their plan. Like, they may not, they don't need that kind of, everybody wants more rather than less, but, can be an impediment to the process. So, then again, like Brent says, at different stages of the transaction, like, where are you and what are the special, where are you in the timeline and what are you particularly dealing with? You don't necessarily have just the one quarterback. You're probably going to shift that responsibility depending on where you are in the overall process. Like, determining what you need to get out of a sale is something that, an accountant and a financial advisor are going to be much more adept to run point on. And then as you get closer to the transaction, maybe it is, maybe it's an attorney or it's a investment banker that's leading the actual transaction process. So I don't think it's just a one person. I think it's very dependent upon where you are in the entire process.
Yeah. Josh, you talk about, kind of starting with the financial planners, and we also talk about being a quarterback. And just to illustrate that, I just want to kind of talk about last month, Mark Hagstrom had set up for one of his clients who's, trying to, they're getting up there, but they want to carefully plan out their exit and how they're going to do things. So he had set up a Zoom meeting for, there was 3 of us. We did it individually, from an M&A basis. And I mean, what would be our approach and how would we do things, and talk a little bit about our firms. And I think that way, Mark, what happened basically was it's not, you're just not recommending somebody. Okay. I mean, you're putting a few different parties in front of that client because they've got to get along too, and there's got to be a relationship. And the last thing you need is organ rejection, because that'll reflect very poorly on you. So I really like that concept, and I think the ability to introduce people to professionals, it makes it their decision as well, and then it just serves for better outcomes.
Yeah, that was a good way to go about that. We had several business brokers lined up, and people had prepared for it, and it was all structured. And then it was great because it was on Zoom like this is, and they afterwards the owners responded positively in the process because it was consultative. And I think that's what you guys are saying here is that it's not, you're not selling one person or trying to, you help them set them up for them to decide and get enrolled in the concept that is trying to be put forward. So thanks for bringing that up, Brent. That's great.
Yeah, I thought it was awesome.
I think Mark just perfectly led into our next question here. So why don't we get into this
all right.
ROI analysis? But Mark's question was, how do you address the idea from Gertrude that more advisors equals more cost? And she sees advisors as intangible and she doesn't value the intangibles. How do you help her understand that value in order to proceed with a team approach? And I think this perfectly relays into what we're going to talk about next in an ROI analysis. So
yeah, good.
Over to Brent.
All right, well, let's go through the question here. How would you go about constructing an ROI analysis that helps a business owner feel comfortable that the investment in the multidisciplinary approach is justified? And I think one thing we got to look at too, I mean, when it comes to ROI, I mean, if we look at Gertrude doesn't like squishy concepts. I think that was clear in the case study. Let's just say Gertrude's looking at a $600,000 piece of equipment, and she does a break-even analysis, and she's going to create efficiencies, and her payback she determines is going to be 9 months. I mean, that's easy. Those dollars will be spent and she'll recoup them, and, it's not perfect, okay? But then we get into some of these squishy things, or what she determines to be more intangibles, okay, like exit planning. And I think our job there is basically to illustrate where she is now, okay, where we think we can take her, the value of getting there, of Gertrude getting there, what does it mean to her? And then we need to define, pretty much what winning looks like. So we've got to kind of make, an intangible more of a tangible, I think, when we illustrate this kind of stuff. So we'll just kind of continue on. One of the things that Gertrude is going to be looking for, or that we're going to be talking to Gertrude about, is what we call transferable value. And that's basically the positioning of the business. Hang on here, I'm in the way here. Okay, positioning the business so that a prospective new owner, okay, and that could be either external or internal, will have confidence that the business will consistently produce the same or better financial results with a new owner as it does under his current ownership. So in that regard, I think what we're trying to do there is, put some, tangible, constructive, something that's real around how we move from where we are to where we're going to go. And I would say that, one of the ways that we do that, as far as we illustrate, is the ability to take something from, what does it look like in real life? And this is a sheet that's right out of our M&A playbook, and it says value range multiples. And this is to illustrate what can drive, a business up or down. Helps a client understand where they are today. Now this one says management and financial example. Okay, but there's other categories too, and we'll go through these and we'll look at some of these same questions as they apply to customers, industries and end users, suppliers, competitors, and then the management of financials. We talk about value drivers all the time in exit planning, and we talk about the John Warlow method, and everybody does a little bit different. So we're just going to focus on this one. Okay, so if we look at Gertrude and we look on the left, and there's little or no accounting systems, no CPA involvement, a one-man operation or no management team depth. We don't know all this stuff for sure about Gertrude, but we know there's not a CPA involvement, and she's not doing the statements. As we move farther to the right and we increase the value, if we go all the way over to the side, we talk about sophisticated information systems, audited financial statements, well-rounded management team, full-time CPA or CFO on staff. Okay, so what does that do? As we move farther to the right, we're basically de-risking the business. Okay, somebody can come into that business and feel very, very comfortable about what they're getting, what they're going to get. As a result, they're willing to pay more. So if we can kind of show Gertrude through a value enhancement program that we can move her, let's just say, from 3.5 to 4.5 if she does certain things, and if her EBITDA is $1 million a year, I mean, that's an additional $1 million in pre-tax sales price. So this is kind of the guts of it, and I think how we can illustrate it. But again, to illustrate it, we've got to kind of show her where she's at now and where we think we can take her.
Yeah, and it's not just necessarily that, one buyer would be definitely willing to pay $1 million more. It's just the fact that as you move across this scale you have on the screen, there's potentially more buyers come to the table. So the less prepared you are, the more options get taken off the table. I mean, I can tell you from performing due diligence engagements that if you see everything here on the left, that, if they have if they keep their accounting basically in spreadsheets, or if they do a little bit of QuickBooks but don't use it to its full capability, they don't have an outside CPA, it's one person. I mean, I'm going back to whoever's the quarterback or whoever I need to report to and say, all right, guys, here's the issue here. The numbers are less reliable potentially than you would hope. And then we have to get to the bottom of it ourselves. And it's that risk, again, that is concerning. I oftentimes hear business owners talk about the sweat equity that they have in this business and how passionate about it they are and how they need this number of dollars in order to retire. And that's just not transferable value like Brent discussed. No one's going to pay for the business owner's lifestyle upon retirement. They want that turnkey operation in order to pay the most.
Yeah, it's funny. Somebody in the Gertrude type position, manufacturing, you're so fixated on what those fixed returns are or your markup on your specific physical assets, and that somewhat of the irony is really the value in your business is going to be driven by all the things that aren't hard and fast physical items. I mean, that's where your value is. I mean, that's because any manufacturing business has assets and has inventory, and all of it is relatively similar value. But where you're going to drive value in the sale and where the value of your business is driven by these intangible factors and stuff that you can't see.
What we hear all the time is my business has so much potential, okay, but they want to get paid for that potential, and yet they've never mined that potential, and they think a new buyer should pay for all that, and that's part of the education process too, because new buyers generally are not going to pay for that potential. So that business typically should if they want to get maximum value, they should get that potential out of it first and then sell it.
I go back to my example of the selling a home analogy. That how many times have you seen a home advertisement that says potential? Usually not a positive remark from the selling standpoint. So,
has anybody ever overpaid for a fixer-upper?
Never.
So what you're saying here is the quarterback is like a quarterback on the playing field should read the defense, and they should take Gertrude's situation here and help to point out the things that are on the left there, if I'm reading this right, and help her to understand that her perhaps stinginess or frugalness about things that she thinks are squishy actually will cost her money in terms of these multiples. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And if we were to look at this slide, for instance, for customers, okay, I mean, on the left it might say, 4 customers make up 95% of the total sales, okay. On the right, it's say no customer makes up more than 5% of total sales. If you lose a 5% client, that's not the end of the world. If you lose a 40% client, that hurts.
Yeah.
Let's move to the next one here, Brent.
Yeah.
This will just touch on this.
Right.
So this is kind of more of a representation of what we're talking about in 2 different spectrums. One being these intangible assets that we're talking about, which includes things like your human capital, your knowledge capital, how your operations are structured. So operational capital, what's the value of your brand? Like how strong is that in your marketplace? And then you assess that in conjunction with your risks, which flows right into what Brent's talking about: customer concentration, your overall quality of your earnings, how your financial reporting is conducted, and where your position is in the industry. So we're talking about risk versus, the strength of your intangible assets. So moving from that lower left quadrant of having high risk and a low multiple, which is probably in certain ways where our case study is and where Gertrude's business is, and moving it more into the upper right quadrant and showing in as tangible a way as possible how accounting for these things and moving along this spectrum is going to ultimately result in a much greater return on a sale or investment from an outside source than if you stay, more in the lower left component. So it's kind of, you can do it in any number of ways. You could obviously just greatly increase your intangible assets, or you could greatly reduce your risk. Either way is going to help you in the overall value of what you're ultimately going to get in your transition.
All right, very good. Question number 4, what characteristics of team members, generally or by specific profession, do you see as being important to ensure that the collaboration team being formed will work well together? And I think part of this is going to be what we talked about earlier in terms of the quarterback, but there's other factors as well.
Yeah, I can start this one out. I think the diversity and experience of your advisors is critical. I mean, not just that they are good tacticians at what they do. That's also an important part of it. But they have some other breadth of experience and have worked, either in a variety of different industries or with a variety of different clients, or just have personal background either in business themselves, or closely connected with the operation of a business. Because I mean, if you are an attorney, you went to law school, you got out of law school, you went into a law firm, you've worked in a law firm, but you really don't have any other experience beyond that, it becomes really difficult to be a very effective advisor as to the overall process. So for me personally, I grew up in a family business. I've worked in a variety of other more closely held operated businesses. And you gain a certain level of perspective that I think is critical. And that's for all advisors at all levels. You do need those tacticians. You do need to have the technical ability and the quality to perform what it is you're expected to perform. But you also need to have a lot of it's just business acumen and common sense, right? I mean, you can't just be someone who's always in an office, never talking to people and never listening to, real business owner problems. Small business owners, family business owners. I mean, there are so many other characteristics of that really are about, in a lot of cases, more about psychology and viewpoint than they are about, the X's and O's, the real hard line numbers. I think a service-driven approach is absolutely critical. It's about what the client needs. It's not about anybody's particular ego or that I am the best transactional attorney in 4 states. I mean, I think about it myself. It's like there are hundreds, thousands of attorneys that can do what I do, but I would like to think that I can do it in a manner that provides some perspective and approach and listens to what a client actually wants or needs. And I'm certainly not the only one in that category, but finding someone who has that sort of approach and it's like, I just want to get you the best result possible. That's what makes me feel good about what happened in your transaction, that you got what it is that you were looking for, not that I created the greatest purchase agreement in the history of purchase agreements. I mean, nobody cares about that document once the thing is done. It's important and you need to get it right. But after that, it's about the result. It's not about, the tools you use to get there. I think personality is critical, especially between the various service providers. I mean, I think you want to work with people that you kind of are on the same level with, that you just see things in a somewhat similar manner. And that's not either wrong, right, wrong, or indifferent. And a lot of that's going to be driven by the client. The client just an incredibly serious, down to the point person, or do they need a little bit of finessing and some levity and some people with personality and a sense of humor and trying to take something that is inherently serious, but not making it, not taking one another seriously to a certain extent, if that makes sense. Like just not, the process is important, but at the same time, like in the current environment we live in, there's so many things that are more important than the transaction at that moment. I mean, it's everybody's overall health and well-being and where they're going. I mean, all those things matter and you're going to get it right. You're going to work on it. But at the same time, you're creating or shifting wealth. It's not completely life or death. So I think that there's at least a little bit of a perspective on that and some measure of levity in the process, I think is important because it's hard. It's a lot of stress. And if you kind of make the serious even more serious, I don't think you're doing anybody any favors. But it's matching personalities. And sometimes people don't have any time for the fluffy stuff. And so you find the right people to work with. And for me personally, I'd rather have people that, have backgrounds, have lives, have families, have, interests and things, because I just think it makes, I don't know, why would we want to work, or why would a client want to work with somebody that doesn't make the process at least somewhat, palatable, if not enjoyable?
Well, at the end of the day, you will or have spent a significant amount of time with these advisors, and you at least should make it advisors you enjoy being around and that it feels like they have your best interest in mind. If someone comes in, starts pontificating, like you suggested, about how great they are, as opposed to actively listening, like Mr. Gregory talked about in part 1, I learned as a young staff person that, you always want to make it seem as if your client you're talking to is your only client, as opposed to saying, hey, look, I'm too busy. You're not my only client. So if it's apparent, at least, that you have their best interest in mind, are actively listening all the time, then that's a good way to go. Another thing to look for is, have they collaborated before? So if I'm working and someone says, hey, do you have a good attorney? I say, well, here's the attorneys I've worked with in the past on such engagements who I have really worked well with. And there's some economies of scale have been gained there. And, I'm not making the decision for you, but you can reach out, and because I'm certainly not going to pass along the names of individuals who I've not worked well with before. And if somebody says, no, I haven't, I don't really have that experience, I don't have any names I can pass along, that's usually a sign of a problem.
Well, I think, Josh, you hit on earlier too that people, we kind of come with their own specialties or skill sets or, subject matter expertise. And we can't know everything, but we do need to know enough about our other partners and what they do, so we know when to tee them up. We know what information, that they're going to be able to provide. And so, I think we have to know more than just our own area, but we do not need to be a specialist other than in our own area, if that makes sense.
Yeah, more time, experience. Trust is everything, not only with the client,
Yeah.
but the people that you're collaborating with.
Yeah.
That comes over time of working together and having those experiences.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Should we move on?
Yep.
Okay. Oh, just before that, I just wanted to mention, one of the things when we talk about teams, and this was a book that I've read a number of times and I've always loved it, and probably a lot of you have too, but by Patrick Lencioni, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And I think sometimes when we talk about putting together a team, it's really good to know where teams go wrong, okay, so that we can kind of avoid those situations. So I'm not going to get real deep into this other than just, I just think this is just a wonderful book when people are talking about teams and just what the issues are, the absence of trust. You can't really do much if your team's doesn't trust each other. Sometimes it's the fear of conflict because somebody doesn't want to say something and yet you're not necessarily serving the client's best interest. Lack of commitment, we see these things on teams all the time where if one particular party doesn't really seem to care, do we just want to keep, bringing them along for the ride? Avoidance of accountability, see this a lot in professionals, and inattention to results. So, those are the things that we're really trying to kind of overcome, and I just think this book does an awesome job of telling that story. So that's kind of a for what it's worth thing. Let's go on to question number 5. How do you handle the situation if you think that a professional who currently works with the owner or his or her company doesn't have the experience, depth, service approach, or interpersonal skills to contribute positively to the team? I want to go back to the prickly lawyer in the case study. And I think these are things, the quarterback has a lot to do with it, but also, we have to serve the client. And there's not a right or wrong answer in terms of how you manage a certain personality, or it could be a family member that just kind of has to be part of it, but they really don't have a lot to add. And I think that's where the quarterback and the client have got to have, some good communication and be able to talk these things through and recognize, where the value is going to come from and where the value is not going to come from, and manage that appropriately. So anything you guys can add to that?
I'll jump in. So I recall an example where in performing a due diligence engagement, the business owner on a sell-side due diligence engagement, we're working with the business owner, and their quote-unquote financial advisor was a tax preparer who had been involved for 30 years as the sole owner's tax accountant and nothing else. And the owner really felt that this guy knew the business better than anybody other than him, and wanted him to quarterback the financial due diligence process. And, to be blunt, from a interpersonal skills standpoint, he was a 0. And some of the games that he admitted to have been playing with some of the tax numbers really didn't lead itself to de-risking the business very well. So rather than just say to the business owner, this guy will not be useful, We sought his input on numerous occasions because he had so much in his head that he could contribute. It was just that the knowledge that he had just in the collaboration process or in the sale process, he'd never been through, and he just wasn't suitable to be the quarterback in that situation.
You know, sometimes it's just a lack of information. One of the things we see a lot is, you know, I mean, it gets time to document a transaction and the client wants to use his attorney of, you know, 30 years and is a good friend and, you know, kind of a general practitioner. And they just don't know why they wouldn't use him when it comes to putting everything together, you know, and what we really try to do is encourage them to, you know, try to introduce them to, you know, 2 or 3 other M&A kind of attorneys that see this kind of work every day, because that's where a lot of problems, you know, really come up if you don't have the right person, and it's difficult to manage around. And, you know, it's those kinds of things. You got to work delicately with the client, but you really got to get them with the right professionals too.
I think piggybacking a little bit on what Ryan said, you know, when you have these people who may not be perfectly suited to be a part of the transaction phase, but you would be, I think you'd be incredibly short-sighted to ostracize them from the process, right? I mean, they're not the right person to get you across the finish line, but you know, the amount of knowledge that they have can be critical, and including them in the process as at least an advisor or, you know, diligence background information or what have you is incredibly important. It might be, you know, the solo practitioner family attorney, maybe not necessarily Berkeley, just somebody who primarily does, you know, maybe has helped with real estate transactions in the small town in which they live, or has, you know, quarterbacked their estate plan and maybe drafted some wills and some trusts and things like that. Like, there's still a lot of valuable knowledge there. They're just probably not the right person to, or not the right attorney in that situation to run the actual transaction.
Right.
You know, so having somebody, you know, having another advisor who can at least alert them to that and say, it's not anything against the person that you have. They're valuable and they've served you well. There's no reason to cut them out of the process, but need to find the appropriate role for them. And maybe it's just that they have a seat at the table to discuss some of the things that they might have knowledge about.
Yeah.
As opposed to being like, you're the wrong attorney, so just back off and, you know, don't be, I mean, that's not going to, especially it's probably going to be somebody who's, you know, a close friend and or advisor of the client, and the client's not going to want to, you know, ruin that relationship. So you're finding a way to insert them, you know, utilize their knowledge, get the help from them that you need without them being the one completely running the process, because it's just probably not something, if they think about it, and if the client talks to them about it, maybe it's not something that they ultimately want to do anyway. They just think that they're obligated to do it because they've been in that role in other capacities. It's just probably more like an obligation of duty to the client than thinking about, do I really have, you know, I really have the desire, not let alone the expertise to do this? Like, I don't want to be forced into it. And maybe it ends up being a good thing that they don't feel like they're forced into something that they're, you know, not prepared to handle.
You know, it's always delicate, and I think especially when, in that case, that professional or that, you know, general practitioner attorney thinks that he is the person to run that process. So there's no right or wrong answers, but it is something we've got to kind of work closely with our clients on. Anything else on that subject? Good.
So.
All right. If there's any questions, I guess we're going to try to field those at this time. You can kind of see, you know, our information as far as the presenters are on here. I also want to kind of recognize Chris Cuneo, who helped us with some of the subject matter that you've seen today and some of the questions and case studies and all that type of thing. So always difficult with Zoom, but does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I'm just searching through the Q&A thing here. I don't see any. Josh, do you see any? I know you were looking at that.
No, we just had the two. We had Peter's question earlier and your question a little bit ago. So far.
I think we put them to sleep.
Well, maybe you answered everything they needed to know. Well, thank you guys. I think this was a great summary and presentation of how to work together, and I really liked. I think we all like case studies and thinking about these things in advance, because we have those are just all real life situations, and they need to be worked through. So it's very helpful. I did take some notes down, and some of those were that no one advisor can do it all, and you pointed that out on several occasions from different points of view. And one thing I was thinking about this presentation was how this is, if you break down exit planning into the phases, for example, the final phase of selling the business, it seemed like we talked a lot about collaboration in that area, but I was also thinking of the other phases, like if you're going to get started with an exit plan and you're 10 years out from exiting, for example, well, having an exit planner, for example, having a estate planning attorney, using an accountant to get these books in order, an insurance agent, so you can have collaboration in the early part. You can have collaboration in the middle when you're trying to create value or build value, leadership training, things that build value, that create systems and processes, implementing traction and using integrators, for example. So there's collaboration, and wouldn't you agree there's collaboration in all of these, in all of the phases of exit planning, including the final year, the final transaction?
No, that's a great point. It's really easy to, I think it's such a great, it's just such an easy explanation, right? Like there's just so many factors that go into the transition transaction part, but you're so right. It's so much earlier than that. And we were talking about kind of when people are involved and at what points. Like in my specific situation, it would just be, it's almost like a dream to be involved like 10 years ahead and just, not necessarily be, maybe there's like a quarterly call between people that the client trusts to just generally talk about how things are going, and having some historical background. Like the advantage to that when you get further down the road is immeasurable. Like I mean, it's so many times, it's more often that we'll get, even if you work with clients that you haven't worked with for a long time, comes out of the blue and it's like, oh, we're going to sell. You got to learn about my business in the next 90 days and sell it. Like you're just not going to do as good a job,
right?
In my opinion, when you don't have that. I mean, but if you have a group of people that you've talked about this thing for years, what's important to the client and what's not. I mean, it just makes the process that much more smooth and more valuable. Yeah. And I think ultimately less costly from what you receive in a purchase price versus, the cost that you pay to get the thing done.
Sure. Just to follow up on that, Josh, too, I mean, I think time can really be your friend when it comes to exit planning. And we see all too often that, it's time to go, just haven't really done that much, but, I want to be done by a certain date. And, you work with what you've got, but you just know they could have done so much better in a lot of cases, and you feel bad.
Well, and one other point you brought up, too, was the critical role of the financial advisor. And you mentioned that, helping the business owner to understand what their financial goals are. Well, what are you going to do in retirement? How much do you actually need to net from the thing? I don't mean gross. I mean, what's the money in the bank in your retirement stream that's going to actually produce the things that you want? And that's really a function of how much time you have then, so that you can build that value, like Brent's chart, where it had the different factors of multiple. And if you had a situation where you could say, well, look, you need to get that extra million, let's say EBITDA was $1 million in that example, and you could move somebody along that chart, well, that's worth $1 million, right? And that, in fact, could pay the capital gains taxes and some of the other selling costs and hiring collaborators, for example, with other advisors, that would allow them to net that amount that they need. And instead of focused on, boy, this is going to cost me a lot, and I'm going to try and trim it down. Ryan, I really loved your analogy of the realtor, because we all kind of think that way, I recently had an experience where we were doing a small bit of landscaping around a new deck, and and I had hired a landscaper, and my wife thought, well, why couldn't you have just gotten that shovel out? And I was reviewing the process, of course, and I said, I sure could have done that, but I never would have done anything like this. And there's just so much value in that, and to not trip over the things that, trip over dollars to save pennies, right?
Right.
Any final remarks from anybody here?
Really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, well, great. Well, thank you. Collaboration somewhat continues the theme of that on our next meeting, which is November 12th. And that is about divorce. And not many of us have, hopefully have a lot of experience with that. I actually do, because I have a designation of that myself, a certified divorce financial analyst. And there is a lot that goes into how you split up the assets, and you'll find that presentation when it comes to the value of a business. I can imagine Ryan, with all the forensic stuff that you do. It's the old adage where people want the business to be as low as possible for taxes and divorce, but they want it to be high for selling, of course, and in keeping. And so, it's a very interesting topic, and I invite you to register for that, because we all need to have that insight, because that's one of what we call the 5 Ds. Divorce is a derailer. Just noticed a question that came through. Brent, can you tell Bob Morse the name of that book you cited?
Yeah, it's called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And the author is Patrick Lencioni, and he's written a number of different business books. And they're all they're good narrative stories, so it's really easy to keep you engaged when you're reading it. It's pretty light reading, but it really brings out a lot of what's important.
And Josh, you had another?
Yep, and I put that in the, so Smart Collaboration by Heidi Gardner was the one that we talked about, that chart at the end of the first question.
This chart, yeah, great illustration, by the way. It takes a while to build value, as we all know. Anytime we're talking about the parabolic curve there, it pounds at the end, right?
Yep.
Really, you get the value later on. So, guys, thank you very much for this. I'm getting a lot of thank yous coming from the group too, and so thanks a lot. We look forward to seeing everybody in November. We've got November 10th is the owners forum, so watch for that. 2 days later, November 12th is our next meeting. We're going to have a steering committee meeting for those of you on the panel in October. And also in September, next week, is the EPI's Insiders Bash. If you want to do a virtual summit, please tune in and register for that. You're running a little bit out of time if you want to get the stuff that they mail you in advance. So thanks, everybody. Great times. Good to see you. Have a great summer, as the end of the summer. It's still summer, by the way. And I think we're going to come back up here at the end of it. So.